The contents of this podcast are provided for interest only and are not to be considered as, in any way, providing legal advice to the listeners of the podcast by Beard Winter LLP. Should you have an issue of concern, you are strongly advised to obtain independent legal advice from competent legal counsel in Ontario or other relevant jurisdiction. You're listening to WP Radio. I'm your host, Terry Doherty, and this is an OIAA podcast. On today's podcast, I sat down with some lawyers from Beard Winter to discuss the legalization of marijuana and how it relates to the insurance industry. We actually recorded the podcast twice because of how drastic the laws had changed from when we originally recorded the podcast. The legalization will take place on October the 17th, so we thought we'd get the podcast out before then. Please enjoy this episode of the podcast. It's Terry Doherty from WP Radio. I'm down here and we're at Beard Winter LLP, and I have Seth Kornblum, Aaron Murray, and David Edwards, all from Beard Winter. Welcome, guys, and thank you very much for being on our podcast today.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks for having us. Good afternoon.
Excellent. Guys, we're here talking about recreational cannabis and it coming into effect in October the 17th, 2018, here throughout the province and throughout the country. So, guys, my questions for you today and really with WP is kind of where we are going with this and how things are going to change with regards to cannabis use in the province. And I'm going to deal directly with Ontario just because that's where, you know, all of the adjusters that are listening to this for the most part are based. So maybe we can kind of go around the table and first of all, tell us who you are and, you know, what kind of practice you do before we do any of this. So we'll start with you, Aaron.
Sure. So I've been here at the firm since 2004, articled here then and never left. And now I'm one of the partners here, and my practice is exclusively in the area of defense work, primarily for insurance companies, some self-insureds, bigger companies under large self-insured retentions as well. Probably half of my practice now is still motor vehicle defense work, and the other half would involve various different types of insurance claims, whether they be slip and fall, commercial general liability, product liability, property damage, large loss damage, fire loss, all kinds of different claims.
And soon to be cannabis claims.
Well, we will see. A lot of it's guesswork at this stage, but I think there are going to be a lot of changes, and look forward to chatting more with you about those changes and potential changes over the next hour or so.
All right, and yourself, Seth?
Yes, Seth Kornblum. I have been at Beard Winter since 2001. I've been a partner in the insurance department since 2009. A broad insurance practice, like most of us, primarily auto, but it has been branching into new areas for quite a while now. And yes, marijuana infractions and insurance issues arising from cannabis will soon be part of that complement.
All right, great. And Aaron, yourself?
Sorry, it's David. But
Oh, I'm sorry, David.
So very similar to Aaron and Seth, my practice is primarily concerned with defense work. I've been with the firm since 2014 when I summered and subsequently articled with the firm and was called to the bar in 2016 and been with the firm ever since. Very similar scope of practice to Aaron and Seth in terms of a lot of my book of business relates to motor vehicle, but as well occupiers liability type claims, property, fire losses, as well as recreational liability type claims.
Excellent, thanks. We're going to have auto claims coming from this, and right now you've got a way of dealing with impaired driving with respect to alcohol. Does any of you know how we're going to deal with this with regards to cannabis? Has there been any discussion from the police or from anybody on how they're going to deal with this from an impaired state driving with cannabis and what the levels are going to be?
Speaking with respect to the insurance issues, initially there was going to be a subjective test that was going to be applied for an impairment similar to an alcohol impairment. But with the introduction of Bill C-46, that's changed a bit. They now have passed testing to be done. It would be a saliva test at the scene, and if it's positive, then it would allow the police and law enforcement to engage in other types of testing, which would be a blood test to see what the levels were. The testing and equipment that they are using captures it for up to 6 hours of use. And although there is some debate as to what the levels are going to be that tip you over from an impaired from a subjective test or not, it looks like they're talking between 2 and 5 nanograms. That would be a lower level offense with a fine up to $1,000. And if you were above 5 nanograms, it would be similar penalties to alcohol impairments. And so the impact on driving per se doesn't really affect third-party liability claims, but the impairment and any criminal offense really only applies to the accident benefit side of things. And when you're going there, you're looking at Section 31 of the SABs, and what it talks about being exclusions to claims if you are involved with a criminal offense. There's going to have to be a change because it only talks about the impairment or the blood alcohol reading. So it's going to have to, we anticipate it's going to have to change to capture this blood test and what the new standards are going to be for marijuana impairment.
Do you think they're going to have to change the OAP 1 as well, or not? Because, I mean, there they have the two parts under Section 722. The first one is if you are charged and convicted of a criminal offense involving an intoxicating substance, and then the other part of it is if you're unable to maintain your vehicle due to an intoxicating substance. They don't say it has to be alcohol, so that's pretty wide in its.
No, I don't think they're going to change that. Because of all the changes that are going to have to come into play with all of the different areas, auto, home, every area, I think that they're going to I think that the insurers and the legislation is going to try and limit the number of changes and so to simplify it and streamline it as much as they can. And if they can rely upon impairment as the test, then there's no reason to change that. The only reason they need to change the SAB is because it talks about the blood alcohol concentration in a driver. And so they're going to have to change that to address the change with marijuana impairment and the subjective testing and then the objective testing that's done with this saliva test at the roadside.
So is this going to be, are we going to run into the same issues that they have now with the roadside test where they can refuse to take the test? Do you think? Is that going to be the same thing?
Again, this is a criminal issue and
no, I know,
we're
but
insurance guys, but actually one of the criminal offenses listed in the exclusion in the SABs is the refusal to comply with the testing.
Okay.
So I think that they can just blanketly apply that to a marijuana impairment as well.
And I know, again, we're talking criminal, but just with regards to, and the only reason I think about it, because I think about the first party offense as well, right? The first party impaired driving, they crash their car and they're charged with impaired, and we don't cover their damages until we find out what their charges were and then if they were impaired or not. So with that being said, that roadside test, this subjective test, is that going to be pass, fail, or that kind of, or is it literally going to be under 2 to 5? Like, is it going to be that specific?
The blood test is going to be the objective testing between 2 and 5 nanograms and 5 nanograms and over. There's going to be a saliva test at the scene. They're going to take a swab
And say pass or fail.
and it's pass or fail, and that gives them the green light, so to speak, to do a more further intrusive type of test on the individual. Again, they're going to have to change the SABs because it talks about failure to provide a breath sample, where it's not going to be a breath sample for a drug impairment.
It's going to be a sample.
It's going to be a saliva sample.
Yeah.
And if you fail to provide that, then I anticipate it's going to fall into the same type of criminal offense. The SABs and impairment only affect certain benefits. It doesn't affect all benefits.
So it's still going to be much like the impaired, so it's going to be the
Correct.
non-earner
Yes,
benefits
the
and
specified benefits are the only ones that are gonna be impacted by this, and obviously the property damage to a vehicle.
okay.
And that's gonna be it.
And what about reduction in coverage on the tort side?
From our perspective, it's gonna be the same as any impairment. There's zero reduction because that's against public policy and it doesn't impact on the third-party liability of a driver to others.
So there's going to be no change
From
there.
our perspective, there's gonna be no change.
Okay.
It's gonna be treated the same way as alcohol.
Okay, terrific. Okay, well, that's good to know. Has there been any changes with regards to the amount of plants that someone can have in their house? I know after reading your article, I know it's not out yet, but kudos to you guys for getting a great article into the WP magazine, and we appreciate it. And it's hopefully the first part of many. And I know both yourself, Aaron, and David and Seth, all of you actually helped author it, so I do appreciate it. But let's kind of talk about that. They were talking about 4 plants, and that's plants of any size. So maybe if you want to take it, Aaron?
Was your question if there's been a change?
Yeah,
to
or
the
is it
number
still
of
going to be
plants?
4 plants? Has there been any changes? I know because the C45 has been very fluid in its changes.
It
So,
has.
so I've been listening on a daily basis to see what the changes have been.
It's certainly a bit of a moving target. As far as I'm aware, it's still 4 plants. So as far as the restrictions in the way that the bill's currently drafted, I think it's the same as it was when we wrote our article. But as we've all seen over the last number of months, it's a bit of a moving target. So who knows if there will be more changes between now and October.
Okay, and what about the amount of possession you can have on your person at any one time? The amount of grams, I think it was 30 grams?
So I believe for recreational use now, 30 grams is of dried cannabis in public is permitted. And it's interesting because for recreational marijuana, the possession limits are much different than for medical use marijuana. And medical use marijuana, the carry limit is actually a lot higher, 150 grams, as opposed to the 30 grams allowed use for recreational.
Is there a difference in medical use for number of plants in the house as well then? Or is that still going to be the same as 4 plants?
One thing to point out is that when we refer to 4 plants, it's 4 plants per house. So it doesn't matter how many people are actually living in the house. It's still 4 plants, and it has been a bit of a moving target. You made reference to the size of the plants. I believe there is a restriction actually on the size of the plants. Last time I checked, I believe it was about 1 meter is as high as the plant is allowed. So it's another consideration. And again, I believe it's going to be up to the municipalities to determine specific bylaws with respect to further restrictions on what each dwelling house is allowed.
No one really paid attention, to be totally honest, I think, because it being medical marijuana, but now that it's recreational, I think it's kind of heightened a lot of people's interest, and there's a lot of kind of fear out there that, people are worried that everybody's going to go out and try it. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure that's going to be the case.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see if that's the case or not. There's probably a lot less people who knows, but less people would be drinking if there wasn't a certain permitted amount of drinking allowed and accepted, I think, in society. And although marijuana as a recreational drug is probably the most accepted by society, or one of the more accepted by society, with it being illegal for the most part still, not as many people you would think have been using it. And we've got some of the stats in the article that David and I wrote. But Statistics Canada estimates about 5 million Canadians between 15 and 64 have been using it now. But once it's a certain amount of recreational marijuana is made legal, you have to imagine that those numbers are only going to increase.
But do you think they're going to increase a lot? Or do you think it's going to be a one-time, you're going to see a spike and then it go back down?
I don't know. I think you're gonna see a lot more people willing to try it because it's no longer considered as taboo being an illegal substance as it is now.
Okay. Now, with the legal cannabis or the recreational cannabis, I mean, I've seen everybody talking about edibles and all sorts of things coming around, but from what I understood, they're still going to be illegal, are they not?
No.
Oh,
No, they're still gonna be,
are they legal then? Come
The
up.
Ontario Cannabis Store put out a note today, August 21st, and said that they will sell a variety of products, including dried flower, cannabis oil, cannabis seeds, to customers 19 and older when pot becomes legal on October 17th. This is online.
And that's from one store, or is that from the Ontario government saying that that's going to be allowed?
That's from one store. They are the only online retailer.
And have they been approved to be an online retailer?
I believe they have.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about home insurance, because that's going to be a big one for a lot of us as well. So right now we've got a lot of claims for mold and illegal operations within a household and all those types of things that come up in claims. Can you see any changes, or do you know of any changes to insurance policies on the home insurance side? Because it's no longer going to be considered an illegal operation as of October 17th.
right, so, I mean, it's gonna become a pretty broad area of concern and a need for redrafting for most of the domestic insurers or anyone insuring homeowners policies in Ontario, because most policies now have an exclusion in there specifically relating to marijuana, some do.
Yeah.
And now that there is going to be an allowed amount, all of those provisions of the policies, those exclusions are gonna have to be redrafted to reflect the fact that a certain amount is now going to be permitted. So it can't form part of an exclusion under the policy.
Well, I'm also going to I'm wondering if the plants are just going to start being grown in the backyard, like they should, like a typical plant, as opposed to what they're doing now is because they're trying to hide it, they're having to put in lamps and do all these things to simulate the change in the day and, night and daytime and stuff. But if they're just growing in your backyard, you're not going to have that mold issue. You're not going to have those issues that you would typically have now with the illegal operations.
True, but I think that a lot of the people, so if we are correct that more people will start using marijuana recreationally now that a certain amount is permitted, there's gonna be more people. I don't think they're just gonna use it from the months of, May to October, perhaps when their plants can survive outside. So people, I would think, there's gonna be more people growing it within their homes too, which could still involve different types of electrical apparatuses and lamps, a need for different types of ventilation systems, and could result in a whole host of an increase in different types of claims that'll no longer be excluded as we've typically seen under policies. 'Cause we've seen lots of grow-op claims over the last number of years that pretty typically result in non-coverage decisions.
And fires.
And fires. But now, there could be similar types of losses that are no longer, they're no longer dismissed because of the exclusions under the policy.
So we may still see the fires, may still see the mold, but they're no longer going to be excluded.
Well, keep in mind, there's a huge difference between the legislative maximum of 4 plants per household, which is defined as the address,
Sure.
and the reference to a grow-op. And we're not here to talk about grow-ops per se.
Sure.
But if you analyze a grow-op and what causes the damage, grow-ops are obviously a much larger scale than having 4 plants in your house. And the causes of the fires are likely not the plants themselves, but the mechanism used to mass manufacture and grow. And you're going to avoid that when you're only allowed 4 plants. The 3 of us had spoken about this earlier, and that it's going to be incumbent upon the insurers to invite their policyholders to give notice of their intention either to grow or possess. because of the inherent added risk to the homeowner policies.
Do you think that there will be an additional charge and premium allowed based on that? So, when your policy's coming up for renewal, you speak to your broker or your agent, whoever it is, and you let them know, hey, I intend on growing 4 plants in my house. And then the broker says that's fine, but there's going to be an additional premium charged for that risk, because there is going to be a different risk. You're right.
We think it's certainly a consideration that the underwriting departments are gonna have to look at, because even though the permitted amount of them restricting it to 4 plants should reduce a lot of the bigger risk, as Seth said, that's associated with the criminal grow ops, there could still be increased claims, and it has to increase the risk level for a homeowner that discloses their intention to grow recreational marijuana within their home.
But is it any more of a risk now then from growing that and growing tomatoes in your basement?
Huge.
Why?
It's increased, first of all, any increased risk is going to result in increased premium.
No, but I'm just saying, what's the difference then? They're going to be saying is it's illegal to grow tomatoes in my basement. I didn't have to tell
Well,
you
no
about that.
one's hopping your fence to come into your backyard and pick a few tomatoes.
I hope not.
That's the first thing.
Yeah,
The equipment used is a lot more sophisticated to grow marijuana than it is to have a few tomato plants in your home or in your backyard. And, as we've also discussed, you're also inviting that criminal element of a break and enter into your home, depending upon where these plants are, depending on who has knowledge of these plants, depending upon what type of, knowledge the community has that you're doing this. These are all increased risk. It's no different than increasing a risk of having a pool, and we've talked about people jumping into your pool when you're not even there. The risk of having renters on your property. Any increased risk is going to result in an increased premium. And there are many reasons that an insurance company will be able to successfully justify that growing up to 4 plants in your home is an increased risk.
What's happened in the US in terms of, if you look at grow-ops and the equipment that are required to grow marijuana inside, and as Aaron said, with our climate, it's most likely that people who are gonna wanna use it on a regular basis are gonna be growing it inside their house. It's a significant increase in water usage, electricity especially, as well as carbon dioxide. So it really increases your risk of fire when when in certain circumstances, carbon dioxide is gonna be, the usage of it is gonna be increased dramatically to help grow the plants. The risk of fire as a result is gonna increase as well. So from that perspective, we don't know exactly if it does touch on what equipment is required, but if you look at typical grow-ops and the equipment that they use, I expect you'll see that in the recreational industry.
yeah. There's your high intensity lights, your halogen lights with the shielding. I've been in quite a few grow ops in my insurance career, so you've got that. You've got the water sprayers. You've got timers. I've been in some really sophisticated grow ops, and I've been in some unsophisticated grow ops, and they all seem to result in fires. It doesn't matter how sophisticated they are, it always results in a fire.
And a lot of the equipment setup, sure, it's a much different scale when it's a big, a big grow operation. But even for just growing a few plants recreationally, people that have grown them inside, they still use, specialized equipment generally.
Yeah,
I
the
believe to do
the
it.
lamps. That seems to be the staple, right? To make sure it's set to a timer, so it's going on, for 12 hours and then off for 12 hours, and then the watering system is also set onto a timer.
And we anticipate that from an underwriting perspective, there's going to need to be a whole host of questions at the application for insurance stage, and perhaps on renewal now too, after the bill comes into effect, dealing with allowed recreational growing of marijuana within the home.
Hey everyone, I just want to let you know about our new portion of WP. It's WP Digital. If you get a chance, go to our YouTube channel, just type in WP Digital and take a look at some of our content. we were going to have all of our videos. We're going to be doing 2 to 3 a month, as well as you'll be able to listen to your podcasts right off the digital channel. So go back, enjoy, and there's some great videos for you to take a look at. Most of all, our September kickoff at the Ripley's Aquarium, a little intro video for you there. Thank you. Now, I know Seth and I spoke before about this, and prior to the podcast and whatnot, we were talking about Colorado and the things going on in Colorado. Do you know if they saw an increase in claims?
So the interesting thing, well, perhaps I'll let Seth touch on this.
Okay.
The danger, thank you, Aaron. The danger there is that you really still have a pro-marijuana side of things and an anti-marijuana side of things. You have to be really careful on the studies you're looking at. We looked at one study that analyzed 547 traffic deaths in 2015 in Colorado. They concluded that 34% were alcohol related, 18% were marijuana related, and about 6.5% were a combination. So you're still twice as many alcohol-related deaths in 2015 in Colorado than there was marijuana deaths. There may be some very valid and explainable reasons for that. Primarily the effect that alcohol has on someone versus the effect that marijuana has on someone. But as easy as I read that stat to you, there are other statistics that and reports that say it's going up. So it's really difficult to kind of gauge where that is in terms of what your numbers are. But again, here's a statistic from Colorado, a jurisdiction that has had licensed marijuana for a while, and in 2015, they had almost twice as many deaths from alcohol as marijuana.
Okay.
So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Also, to touch on your medicinal marijuana question from earlier, the number of plants you have is going to be dependent upon the prescription that you have. Okay, because the prescription that you're going to have is going to give you your answer as to how many plants you can grow. If you have 1 gram, you're going to have up to 5 plants. If it's going to be greater than 1 gram, then the number of plants you're going to grow is going to go up. And so we anticipate that the number of plants you have, if you have a license for medicinal marijuana, is directly in proportion to the prescription that you have.
So they won't even have that limitation?
No, and keep in mind that the medicinal marijuana is very different chemically composed as to the recreational marijuana. And so there are a lot of differences between the two. You can't really just compare the two by saying they're apples and apples. It really is apples and oranges when you're comparing recreational marijuana, its effect on people versus medicinal marijuana.
This is, for me, C45 is such its own little animal. It's with it changing constantly and not knowing. They really have been really vague in how they rolled it out.
You'll be able to buy your seeds legally from the Ontario Cannabis Store online.
Oh, okay.
Starting October 17th, 2018, you will be able to buy the seeds from Ontario Cannabis Store online.
Wow, okay. And do we know strengths on that? Or is there it's just seeds and then, and again, I don't know how it really works. Do you inject it? Does it come, because they talk about THC, the active ingredient. Is that in it?
Let's look into that for you, Terry, and we can continue our conversation on homeowners. And again, back to homeowners, it's like any risk, and Aaron and I spoke, it's the fence around the swimming pool, it's the railing on the stairs, anything that an insurer sees as an increased risk to the property is going to be something that they're going to it's going to draw their attention. This is a little different because it's new, and it's a little different because of how it's being phased in. But nonetheless, this all goes back to what we've discussed about underwriting and knowledge and awareness of added risk to someone's home.
Has anyone contemplated renter's insurance versus homeowner? So what I mean by that is you're a homeowner and you rent out part of your property, or even the entire property to another party, and they're growing marijuana in your property, and you're unaware of it.
Yeah, so I think we do touch on that a little bit in our article as well, because it's gonna have to form, I mean, a smart landlord is gonna wanna have that form part of their tenancy agreement. And insurers who are insuring landlords are gonna wanna have a look at those tenancy agreements, I think, when they're trying to set an underwriting premium for a particular policy, and make sure that the questions are being asked as far as intentions to grow recreational marijuana, or maybe even possess, and making sure there's some sort of wording in those tenancy agreements relating to the restrictions.
And do we have any clarification on, I know there was some talk that the condos were gonna just say no to growing marijuana altogether. So did that ever get clarified?
I would have to imagine that it would depend on it would be up to each condo corporation, because they're private companies, they can set their own regulations.
They can, right?
But you
Yeah.
would think that it's gonna result in issues similar to having pets within condos, because a lot of them have tried to set regulations relating to pets, but a lot of pet owners have successfully argued that they can't be restricted from having pets, because they should be allowed to.
The suggestion is it's gonna be very difficult to pass that because of the fact that unless you have a general smoking ban, you can't target something that is, you can lawfully possess. So you'd have to have it as a more blanket smoking, no smoking ban on the property itself. And if you can't enforce that, then you likely would not be able to enforce a smoking ban on marijuana.
So let's talk about, if it's gonna be legal, you're gonna be able to smoke it in your car?
No.
I think it'll
No,
be the
the
same,
law says no.
same as alcohol.
Same as alcohol,
So although
then.
a certain amount of alcohol is legal, you can't have
You
open
can't drink and
alcohol.
drive, sure.
Well, not only can you not drink and drive, you can't have open alcohol
Yeah.
in the vehicle.
So it's gonna be the same, you can't have a passenger in the back seat smoking marijuana?
No.
You
Okay,
can only smoke in a private residence.
in a
Use
private,
in public spaces and vehicles is not permitted.
okay, well, that makes that clear. Let's talk about theft from the home and the increase of that. Did we get any of that? Did you get any of those statistics when you were looking at the Colorado? And I go back to Colorado because it seems to be the longest standing one. Did the crime increase in the Colorado area, Seth, from your review?
Again, we prefer to focus on the non-criminal side of things.
Yeah, but for insurance claims, I mean, is there any?
For insurance claims, I think that is an obvious concern and risk, and it's been raised in the article that David and Aaron have written.
Yeah.
It's an obvious concern that, this becomes an added risk of theft and damage to plant, and that talks about, the policies itself, or the homeowner's policies and damage to plant, and Aaron and David spoke about that in their article, that it's something else that you're gonna have to get another rider on your policy, and you're gonna have to get an endorsement, because while we still can't definitively tell you how much a plant is worth, all of the cases that have been looked at seem to generally conclude that the value of a plant is greater than the allowed monetary policy limits for damage to plant, non-marijuana plant. So this is obviously going to be a concern for those that are growing as well.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, we sort of touched on it. I mean, we're certainly not experts. I don't think anyone's an expert yet on recreational marijuana here in Ontario, but we're certainly not experts on Colorado. But when we were trying to do research on this topic, so that we could put together our thoughts on what may happen here in Ontario, I think we had anticipated that there'd be a lot more out there about the impact that it's had in states that have legalized it, like Colorado. But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much out there, even though it's been legalized for a couple of years.
Are they keeping it quiet?
Well, I mean, I on a personally, I travel to Colorado almost on a yearly basis,
You better explain why you're there.
to go to the mountains, and I had thought that
Why do you go to the mountains, Aaron?
I go to the mountains to go snowboarding, Seth.
Excellent. So buttermilk or?
But no, usually Vail.
Oh, okay.
But we thought the first time that we went there after the legalization that it'd be a lot more in your face, even just in stores but it really isn't and wasn't. We didn't see much of a change going there, and it was interesting when we were doing research because there wasn't nearly as much out there as far as how it's impacted the insurance industry in Colorado or claims in Colorado.
Sure.
And Seth touched on it briefly earlier, and just to add to that is that although there isn't a ton of research out there, the statistics, you gotta be very careful as to who the source is, because there's a lot of pro-marijuana and anti-marijuana, so the statistics you do find out there, you gotta take with a grain of salt, because you can see them going one way or the other depending on who the source is.
Sure, there's going to be bias, obviously, from both sides. Let's talk about this Stewart versus TD case. It's in your article. With regards to, their recreational, it's not a recreational case, but it's actually a medical marijuana case.
Yeah, so in that case, the interesting thing is the court in that one held on the side of the insurer because they said that it was not a usual use of the property in essence. But you'd have to think that a case like that now involving stolen or damaged plants, that it'd be different because it's no longer going to be an unusual use of a property, or at least most properties.
Well, he claimed $50,000, right, in damaged plants and stolen plants?
Right.
And with a limit of his policy with $1,000.
Right.
Right? And that's typical, I would say, of most homeowners' policies is, unless your plants or your trees or shrubbery are itemized or scheduled items, that's typically the limit you'd see on a policy.
Well, and that's part of what Seth was touching on a few moments ago
Yeah.
too, because typically most plants aren't worth much money.
Sure.
And there's going to have to be consideration now into the value of the value of the recreational marijuana plants that are on the property. And again, I think this is going to go back to the underwriting concerns at the times of application for insurance and renewal for insurance once the bill's enacted.
So do you think they're going to have to put a rider, like a specific rider, on the policy then, Seth? You think that's going to be how they deal with it, or do you think it's just going to be they're just going to increase the limits for coverage for plants, or is it going to be a combination of both?
I think it would be a rider. I think it'd be no different than if someone has jewelry in their home that exceeds the standard policy limits.
Sure.
And they want to increase the value and minimize their risk. It'll be no different for marijuana. Again, unfortunately, I think a lot of lay people out there may not be aware of this limit on plant. There are many cases, as Aaron and David have seen, there are other very similar cases in the United States where the same type of objection comes. And all of these cases have one key element. And the key element is that the policyholder is not aware of the policy, of the limits of their policy. Had they been aware of these limits, they surely would have declared this to their insurer, and they would have taken steps, presumably, to increase the limits that were available to them. So is this a broker issue? Maybe. It might be a broker issue, but it's not an insurer issue. I don't think that there's any risk to the insurer. The policy says what it says. It's no different than if you had a flood and you had damage to your home and you had a policy limit of $25,000. That's all they're going to pay you. If you have plants and your policy says all plants have a value of X, that's all you're going to get. If you want more, then you need to disclose that to your insurer and or your broker and alert them to the fact that you need additional coverage.
Well, okay. That's going to be interesting come the first big property claim of 4 plants at 50 grand or whatever it's going to be. I don't know what they're going to be, but I mean, I'm sure it's going to be more than $1,000.
It'll have to be.
Yeah.
As David said earlier, if you're going to limit the height of the plant, you're obviously going to limit the yield that the plant is you're going to be able to retrieve from the plant. I think that growing marijuana may not be much different, as Aaron and I discussed, of those that make homemade wine or those that do a little moonshine in their backyard. This really is the more we review this, there is quite the science, and it's not just the green thumb of, using your analogy of the tomato plant. There is quite the science to this. When you look at the different seeds that we see that are available online for purchase, some of them require 24-hour light. So that's going to be quite the hit on your hydro bill, for example, to have light. And it's not just your standard, halogen light bulb that's going to be doing this.
Yeah.
And these seeds, I mean, if you're taking from seed, it's going to be a very sensitive endeavor to have any type of productive plant yield from this. So growing plants may not be, it may be, I was going to use the buzzword, but it may be, a kind of neat, kind of novel thing to do, but we really don't think that a lot of people are going to be successful in growing plants. The big thing here is the commercial consumption, or the commercial, just the commerce of it, and the purchase of it, and the impact. We don't anticipate that you're going to have everyone that's going to go out and line up and order seeds from this online company, and then have to germinate them, and then have to water them, and then have to fertilize them, and then have to put 24-hour light on them. It becomes an expensive endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it.
And then when you add the added risk of the insurer telling, presumably inviting people to declare and disclose that they have the plant, and the increased policy that's going to come, or the premium that's going to come from the policy, people may think twice about growing.
Okay. Let's talk about the social host liability aspect, because I think that may pose a lot of risk that changes things. I mean,
So it's still going to be treated the same way as alcohol from the perspective of someone that's hosting a party. Where the difference is going to come in is if the person hosting the party, or the homeowner responsible for the property as the occupier, is providing to others a strain that they've grown themselves, and who knows what's in that, and who knows what type of effect that could have on the people consuming it. But it would be the same as treated the same as someone who's growing or making their own alcohol in their basement, I would think.
yeah, where I was going with that is now you've got a bunch of adults that could have 30 grams on their person. Everybody could have 30 grams on their person, right, at any given time. And now you're sharing that with somebody in that person's home. So you may not be the homeowner, but you're at an event or a party at someone's house, and you share it with somebody else, and then they have an accident when they leave. Was the host then responsible for it, because it was actually at their home?
I don't think so. The same way as someone who's attending a party, and they may be sharing their alcohol with other people at the party. The Supreme Court of Canada in the Child's decision has said that the homeowner can't be held responsible for what the various people that have been invited to their home are doing.
Okay.
Essentially.
Right. The bigger concern, as Aaron has touched upon, and the article touches upon, is those that are going to take pride in their homegrown marijuana, and someone has some ill effect from it.
When you say ill effect, you mean being sick?
Being sick.
Oh, okay.
Not being impaired to operate a vehicle per se. I mean, Child is pretty clear on what it says. again, as we've touched on, a lot of the rules and laws on alcohol and impairment are going to carry right over into marijuana. There's a substance that impairs you and intoxicates you, it's going to be treated the same. You can't control everyone at your home if they're all going to bring 30 grams of marijuana into your home.
It's going to be quite the party.
It's going to be quite the party.
What about commercial? So we've touched on auto, we've touched on home. Let's touch on commercial.
Commercial we don't think is going to have any impact. Again, keep in mind, well, in terms of a social host liability, commercial host liability, there's not going to be any impact because, again, keep in mind of the law of where you're able to consume the marijuana. Okay, we're not going to have bars that spring up and people are going to be able to just sit in a bar and smoke a joint, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very clear that you can only smoke in a private residence. So it's going to limit that. You're not going to have this, a bar is not a private residence.
Sure.
That's pretty clear and we can all accept that. So it's not going to be the type of thing where you're going to have this kind of consumer consumption of a product.
It's not going to be like alcohol. You
It's
just
not
can't
going to
go
be
a
like
bar and
alcohol.
Go
No,
to a special event or whatever.
listen, that's not going to be, I mean, that's not going to apply to any commercial host who's a retailer. I mean, we talked earlier as well that, you know, there's rumors now that Second Cup wants to get into the game because they have all these stores, and if it's going to become privatized, or it's not going to be privatized in terms of sale. They have all of these retail stores in all these locations, and coffee and marijuana to some people are a natural marriage. So it's possible that they're going to have those types of commercial host exposure that is not going to be for a social host. And again, it's not going to be any different in terms of for selling any product that's tainted.
So they'll be able to sell it there, but you won't be able to consume it there.
Correct.
So it's a take-home type deal.
Correct.
Okay. What about on the commercial aspect as far as commercial growing and that? Has that really been looked at?
I mean, I'm glad you brought it up because I'm hoping that perhaps that can be the next article that we look into for the organization. We haven't done a lot of the research that'll be necessary on it yet, but we do anticipate that it is going to have an effect in general on commercial production. Certainly, because what we've already seen in the last few years is a lot of companies are incorporating, starting big operations, getting investors, and getting into the game, so to speak, of growing marijuana, because everyone's anticipating the big commercial interest that's going to be there to purchase it. So that's going to result in more productions, more production facilities. Different types of underwriting concerns for those production facilities and delivery, as you sort of touched on.
Yeah.
As you sort of touched on earlier, and you know, we have seen claims in the past involving big greenhouses and with respect to vegetables and things like that. There's going to be those types of operations that now, instead of growing vegetables, they're growing marijuana. And there's going to be a lot more of them. And now, when one of those facilities is damaged and they lose a crop or part of a crop of marijuana, the damages are going to be far greater than they were when it was a crop of tomatoes.
Sure.
For
Yeah.
instance.
Based on the plant, you're saying the cost of a plant is more than $1,000 per plant. I don't know. Have they specified what they think a plant costs?
Again, when we went online, it's no one really wants to share that information publicly as to what plants cost. And again, it depends on the height of the plant, it depends how mature the plant is. There are a lot of factors involved. But just going back to the point before, on the Ontario Cannabis Store has announced that they have licenses with 26 companies to supply them with marijuana.
Wow.
Okay, that's as of August 20th. So these are LP licensed producers, and they have agreement with 26 different companies. So this is, it's gonna be a huge cash crop, and it's gonna be, it's obviously much more regulated than other crops for various reasons. And with that comes the natural need for insurance and the natural risk of damage to crop, as Aaron has talked about, and also the risk of you know, that product liability beyond that.
So is you think it would be fine then if somebody was carrying 30 grams on their person, that it's in the back of their car, much like alcohol? It can't be within the reach of the driver or whatever. But I've got to assume it can't be within the reach of anybody in the car then, any occupant. So I've got to assume it's all got to be in the trunk then?
No,
No?
I wouldn't think it has to be secured.
No? Okay.
You are lawfully allowed to possess up to 30 grams in public. The prohibition is on where you can, in theory, consume it. It's not on, there's no prohibition on possession. It could be in your back pocket of your, I mean, we could plug any clothing company, but it could be in the back pocket of your pants.
Yeah.
As you drive home. I
Okay.
don't think it has to be secured. I don't think there's nothing that we have seen that is going to regulate transportation of marijuana when someone purchases it for private consumption.
Okay. And I'm not sure if we touched on this. Did they speak about edibles as opposed to smoking it? Is that being dealt with in this legislation, C-45? What the type of consumption of the product is going to be, or in what form it's going to be allowed in? You know, you're going to allow, you know, if you're allowed 30 grams, you're going to allow, what does that work out to, 80 gummy bears or whatever they're going to, the little item's going to be, right?
Well, I think they're gonna have to figure that out, and that's, you know, some of those things are gonna be part of the intricacies that, as this thing is rolled out, they're really gonna have to start paying attention to. But I would anticipate it would have to be a determination of the amount that's within whatever the edible is, because edibles are allowed.
So I've heard two different things. So your understanding is edibles are going to be allowed come October 17th?
Online, yes, as we've currently discussed. In terms of a brick and mortar store, no.
All right. So what about these? Because currently now I know if you go to any reserve, they're selling all sorts of stuff already. So the edible, what I was saying is, though, the edibles, you'll be able to just buy them online. Then, as far as you know at this point, it's not going to be in
Well,
store.
again, it was announced by Ontario's only online retailer that when it's legalized, they have supply agreements in place. So our understanding is that as long as and this was in at least one of the drafts of your article, is that as long as you're not using dangerous solvents in the process, then people will be allowed to make edibles for personal use.
Oh, okay.
So these are the products that we may have discussed. Gummies, chocolates, I have no idea. Oh, here's a list. Brownies, chocolate chips, fruit bars, almond milk, other type products. So that's where the regulation is. And as we discussed, again, amongst ourselves, marijuana itself is much less complicated and complex than the products. And so I think that's why the government decided to start with sale of marijuana only to start, and then they're going to phase in the other products. And our understanding is that those other products are going to be sold in a much larger scale. And we also, in our research, have looked at this, and that Health Canada is currently considering THC concentration limits on these products, so that presumably their potency is not going to be any greater than the marijuana itself. And as we're all well aware from medicinal and other reasons or other sources, there are different strains of marijuana, medicinal marijuana at the moment, that will have different effects on people, and there'll be it won't change at all in terms of what they're doing here.
All right, so guys, don't forget, check out the article. And again, I apologize that the article is just by Aaron Murray and David Edwards. It's not by Seth, but I'm sure you had some input on it. Thank you very much, guys, for your time today. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And again, I'm hoping to do another follow-up with you guys, maybe not late next year, but maybe April or May next year after we've had some claims, because I know they're coming through the door.
The change in this landscape from when we first contemplated doing this podcast till now has been so significant that it'd be nice to have some stability in adjusting these claims and then defending or prosecuting these claims moving forward.
Well, thank you very much again, guys, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you soon. All right, guys, I'm glad you enjoyed this month's podcast. I just wanted to let you know that we have a great episode coming up next month. It's a surprise, so, we'll let you know when it's coming out. It's going to be great, and we'll talk to you soon.